what I want to do today is to introduce the Model United Nations program, especially on behalf of one particular organization. There are many organizations which do this. The one that I want you to introduce you to is the National Model United Nations in the United States. I'm a member of the board there. And essentially, this is the biggest simulation of the UN anywhere in the world. So at the annual conference, we have about close to, they have 2 conferences back to back. There are about 3,500 students in each of them. So it's a huge simulation. And just to get you into the mood for it, I've got a short video which actually talks about the NMUN conference in New York. So I'll turn that on. They raise a bunch of issues which you'll hear participants talk about, and then I have a short presentation, maybe 15, 20 minutes, about what I think are the main benefits of the program and what we learn from it and how it can be useful for everybody, especially our students, both undergraduate and graduate students. So let me turn this on first. So here we go.
National Model United Nations is an opportunity for students to research another perspective, to walk in someone else's shoes and learn more about international relations and multilateral diplomacy. So students are assigned to represent a country, perhaps Brazil or the United Kingdom, and learn what that country thinks about climate change, about Millennium Development Goals, about how to solve some of the world's problems. And then they come to present their ideas, not their personal ideas, but as diplomats to try and represent the ideas of a member country. Sometimes they may not agree with themselves, but that too is part of diplomacy. We're very lucky that our background for doing all of this is the United Nations itself. So inspired by the people that do real work in these facilities, there's the opportunity for students to see themselves as future leaders.
The concept of Model United Nations is, I think, understanding international politics by doing it. Students prepare to represent interests of a country that might not know well beforehand. They try to get into the role of diplomats, try to understand why they act in the way that they act at the United Nations, and they interact with each other in committees. And by interacting, by discussing how to address various problems of international politics, they learn about these topics, they learn about how international diplomacy is done.
After a conference like that, to be able to come here makes it real, you know, really, like it gives you a little more nutrition on the whole conference.
It is about the spirit of the United Nations, the spirit of cooperation, and this is the place where every single member state has one goal. So no matter if you are a large country, if you are a small country, if you are rich or poor, whatever you stand for, this room reflects the diversity of the United Nations and is exactly the place where this diversity unites.
There's an amazing number of international delegations from Europe, from Latin America.
We have delegations coming from over 30 countries.
More than 5,000 delegates from every single continent, in fact.
Many of them are second language speakers. A preparation process that usually lasts from half a year to 10 months is a very challenging process, but it's a process which helps you grow not only as a student of international politics, but as a person, as a member of the team.
I think the international affairs knowledge is super important, and I think there's no real place to get it in such an experiential fashion as Model United Nations, but also the development of professional skills, researching, writing, public speaking, negotiations, small groups, and leadership.
There's no other way where you can meet as many people that know so much about the topic at hand. So it's a very challenging experience and definitely very enriching.
To me, because we're from France, just to be able to come here in New York, I think this is the perfect experience.
Wish I could say it was the first time, but this is about the 15th time that I've been to the UN for this purpose. And every time I'm here, it fills me with such a sense of excitement and joy that I can actually be here to participate in something so phenomenal.
I mean, you're in New York City, so you're able to obviously enjoy the city, and everybody needs someone to do that with, and it's a great opportunity really in between sessions for delegates to get to know people from different backgrounds, and it's certainly something that we encourage as well.
I love New York, it's so lively, there's so much energy. I love just looking out and seeing all these tall buildings. It's such a wonderful experience. You really get to meet so many people from so many different places.
The one advice I would have for any delegation is to not be scared of what's going on in the community, and do not hesitate to just step in and get involved as much as possible, because it's by getting involved in the debate, in the negotiation, that you get the best model UN experience, and that at the end of the week you really feel like you've achieved something.
It's pretty fun, and you get to meet people from all over the world. I got a couch to sleep on every continent except Antarctica, and it's because of this.
You will find lifelong friends if you join the organization. And this is what makes NMUN and serving on the volunteer staff of NMUN so special.
I think the best thing to say is that you cannot describe what an NMUN is, you just have to live.
So that was just this is actually a couple of years old. So that gives you a little feel of what the main flagship conference that NMUN holds is like. It's truly a life-changing experience for a lot of people. It is also where we create what I refer to as junkies, people who keep coming back, like this lady who was chief of staff. She's been there 15 years. She's well into her career. She takes time off from work to help come run the conference. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about what it means to run a national model UN or just a model UN program. And as I say there, I really think it's a critical tool for developing leadership, diplomatic, and negotiating skills. And these skills are transferable. Right? You can take them out of whatever field you are in, use them there, because really the techniques are pretty much the same. What you try and achieve in terms of skills is pretty much the same. So it is something really interesting. So before I go on, I will skip this as to why we should do the model UN. Essentially, really, I think that we kind of underestimate how much multilateral negotiations has achieved internationally. We kind of tend to look at the areas where multilateral negotiations have not been successful, right, including in the UN. But we forget that there are many, many areas where multilateral negotiations have, since the end of the Second World War, made a better world, made a safer world, and almost certainly prevented yet another world war. So nowadays, when we have political leaders who seem to be moving away from multilateral negotiations, I think it's even more important that we teach and inculcate these skills, because at the end of the day, I think multilateral negotiations are our best hope to create a planet which will be a better place to live in, a safer place to live in, and a fairer place to live in. And essentially, this is what the goal, at least philosophical goal, of the Model UN program is. So the organization that I'm talking about here was actually established in 1927, before there was a before there was the United Nations. They actually used to be called Model League of Nations. So they were established when the predecessor organization of the UN was around, called the League of Nations. And they were doing essentially the same thing. They were getting people trained, students trained on how to negotiate and do all those skills I'll talk about in a minute, and then running a simulation of the League of Nations. So the League of Nations, of course, didn't work out for a variety of reasons we don't have to go into here. So the objective of the program, so I'll just go through the objective goal kind of stuff to make it clear, is to train a group of students to represent the assigned country or countries, right, at an intercollegiate conference simulating the United Nations. The idea is to use experiential learning to develop leadership and negotiating skills, as I said, that transfer to any executive level career. Right? In fact, many of people who go through this do end up in executive level careers, mainly because of many of the skills they learn while they're doing this. And of course, the bonus here is, which the video was kind of trying to stress because it's meant to recruit college students, is that you get to travel. Our organizations runs, of course, the National Model UN Conference in New York, but we also run international conferences. So there's one which is held in Germany, which is next year. There's one in Japan. There's one in South Korea. There's one in China, which just ended, where I was before I came here. There's one in the Czech Republic. There is one in Italy, and there's one in France. And my main reason for coming here is that we are really looking for partners so that we can do this in what we call the Global South. So my first choice, of course, naturally was we should do it in India. So we hope to be able to set up such an international conference in India. And that is the main reason I'm here. The students, of course, get tremendous opportunity to travel. They meet people from all over the world. It's a cultural experience also, right? So these conferences involve not only just sitting in committees, but going out and understanding the culture and the people of the countries that they are in, and so on and so forth. Invite you guys to go and check out the webpage of NMUN. It's very simple, www.nmun.org. So again, I know there are some people here who have been doing it from high school, but for those of you who are not familiar with it, let me just go through the structure of a UN simulation, and then we'll talk about the skills that we hope to develop in them. So participating organizations, or delegations as they are called, apply with their country preferences. Delegation sizes can vary from 4 to 32. Actually, I think 35 is the largest delegation size. One or more countries may be assigned to each participating organization depending on the size of their delegation. By the way, you never get your country. The idea is that you step out of your comfort zone and step into someone else's shoes and see the world from their perspective. Right? Essential for you to be able to be efficient at multilateral negotiations. So you get your country assignments. Right? Once countries are assigned, participating organizations assign 1 or 2 delegates to each committee their country is on. So I'll come to the committees in a minute. So examples of committees, for example, over the last few years: UNESCO, UNHCR, WHO, United Nations AIDS, Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, International Atomic Energy Agency, General Assembly, Security Council, Human Rights Council, UN Habitat, Forum on Sustainable Development, Environmental Assembly, etc. Of course, these cycle out depending on what the theme of the conference is each year. So depending on the theme, different UN agencies and bodies are chosen to be simulated. So each delegation will then see which committees or bodies they are on. They'll assign 1 or 2 students to that committee, and then they prepare to represent the committee they are supposed to be. Each committee has its own agenda, right? So again, as an example here, from I think this is the year last year, 2 of the committees one was the high-level Forum on Sustainable Development. This was their agenda, right? And then the United Nations Environmental Assembly with its agenda there. So as you understand here, once you are assigned to a committee, and let's say you are Peru, right? A country you're not familiar with at all. Your job is to actually find out and research what Peru's position is on the topics in your committee, right? And not only know what Peru's position is, be able to defend Peru's position, even if you don't agree with it. Right? So the first time we were China, we had lots of kids who said, well, how do I defend China's position? I said, you are learning a diplomatic skill. What do diplomats do? They lie for their country, right? So that's what your job is. You defend China's position. And this is actually a skill, to be able to step into someone else's shoe and see things from their perspective. It doesn't mean you convert to their point of view, but at least you understand. And actually, if you understand where the other guy is coming from, you are much more likely to be successful in negotiations than if you have no clue why they are saying what they're saying, right? So anyway, basically, I also run this as a course. So by the time they finish, these kids know a lot more about these topics and their country than I will ever know, because I simply don't have the time to do that, right? And especially like at the NMUN conference, there might be 32, 33 committees we are on. So as I've already pointed out, this is what they do. Then, of course, while there are other bunch of, I run this as a course, as I mentioned, and they participate in regional, national, and international conferences. I know there's an active model UN community here in the in India. I know that Delhi has one. I understand there's a lot of conferences which are held in Bombay. I know Hyderabad has conferences and stuff like that. So it's not only just that you organize this locally, you can go to other parts of India and participate in regional conferences. And then, of course, there are the international conferences you can participate in. So the training, again, to summarize, in 4 broad areas, right? Number 1, right, in-depth study of the country you are representing, its history, its politics, its international relations, with, of course, expertise in the committee that you have been assigned to, right, with general knowledge about that country. The idea is, can you put yourself in their shoes and see the world from their point of view? Right? How does the country look at that issue which is on your agenda? What it has done about that issue, right? What it would want the committee to do about that issue, right? Et cetera, et cetera. In fact, one of the things they do is to write what is called position papers, where they will write a formal position paper on what their country's position is on the different topics in their committee. Right? And that is technical writing again. So these position papers, just to give you an example of how intense it can get, so you have 2 pages to write 3 positions on your 3 topics. And each of those 3 positions have to talk about what is your country's perspective on the issue, what has it done about this issue, what it wants the committee to do about this issue. And the third part is where you actually have to think, right? And then you, to be able to put it, one of our biggest challenges always is they say, but I need more space. Nope, you don't have more space. You have to learn how to express yourself in a succinct manner, because nobody is going to read a 10-page position paper. If you think they do, you need to come to the real world, right? So, but anyway, so they do that. They make those preparations. And of course, they will be taking this, as we have seen here, outside the club. The second, of course, is understanding the politics and structure of the United Nations itself, because that's the organization where all this is happening. So we spend some time talking about how the United Nations actually functions as opposed to how it's supposed to function, the role of powerful countries, what options are open to the less powerful countries. So if you are Vanuatu, how do you get your way in the United Nations, right? And so on. So politics and structure of the United Nations, so you're aware, excuse me, what your committee can do, what your committee cannot do, what is its mandate, all that kind of stuff. Again, this gets pretty intense and detailed. Number 3, diplomatic skills, right? What are the rules of procedure at formal meetings? How do you use those rules of procedure to get the meeting to move in the direction you want it to move? I've already mentioned position paper writing, drafting resolutions, because when you are in committee, you're drafting resolutions to be adopted by the committee. How do you draft a resolution which says what you want it to say? How do you make sure there are no loopholes so that people can misinterpret what you want them to say? Or maybe you want to put a loophole in to give your country a way out, right? But whatever it is, you have to be constantly thinking of as, since I'm using Peru, as Peru, right? What would Peru do in these circumstances? And then, of course, leadership skills, right? Negotiation and compromise, right? Coalition building, persuasive public speaking. These are all integral parts of a good model UN program, which is trying to develop these things. Of course, we merge in-class learning with application of knowledge when we go out to conferences and stuff like that. So I'll just give you some other areas which really are areas which you develop skills in. Problem solving. The entire model UN experience is centered around problem solving, right? In cooperation with other stakeholders, right, who often have competing goals, right, and doing so in multilateral negotiations. And that's a real important skill to be able to approach something as a way of solving a problem that exists or an issue that might be there. Working as part of a team. This is another very important aspect. Students from different backgrounds, with different majors, with different skills, right, are assigned to these countries, and they are in their committees. They might be with somebody in a committee. Some of my best delegates, by the way, come from the hard sciences, right? Computer science in particular. So here they are working with people who have different majors. In many cases, they might be from a completely different background. GSU has the, I think, strength of being one of the most diverse campuses in the country. So we've currently got students from like 120 different countries learning there. They're on the UN team. You got to learn to work with a girl from Guinea because she's your teammate on your committee, right? And that is itself a skill that you develop, right? You develop team spirit through working together irrespective of personal differences. So I always have to give what in the South is called a come to Jesus talk, which is you call people in and say, you are supposed to be professionals. I don't care if you hate each other. You still have to get your job done in this committee. That's your responsibility, right? So, and that is itself a learning experience, right? You learn how to subdue personal conflicts in order to achieve a common goal. And God knows we all need that, right? Okay. We also always end up with people who have done this for several years. They kind of emerge as mentors of people who are new on the team, and so on and so forth. So that's another learning experience, which I think is very important. And then, of course, program organization skills. You can set it up this way. You can have a board of students who help whoever the faculty advisor is to do the organizational part of this process and provide support and so on and so forth. Another learning experience for people in a serious sense, right? Negotiating skills, yeah, getting to yes, as they say. Right? And this, by the way, in my experience, is the most difficult thing to teach. Right? You might be in a room like in the General Assembly committees at the National Conference. There are 400 delegates in the room. Right? You have to learn how to negotiate with them, and they're coming from all over the place. They're representing different points of view. They have different priorities, right? And you have to know how to deal with them. You have to also know how to talk to some of them, and you have to know how to ignore some of them, right? And that is something that you learn based on what you see and what you experience and so on and so forth. So as we say, these are the four main, I'm sure some of you are aware of this, the four principles of what we call negotiations that we use, at least. Separating the people from the problem, which is always the most difficult thing to do. Right? Focusing on interests and not positions. Almost all human disagreements are based on four interests. Right? Security, economic well-being, right? Sense of belonging, right? Recognition, control over your own life. Right? All disagreements are about one of these. Right? Students learn, okay, I don't care what the US delegation is saying. What is the underlying interest? And if the US delegation is not prepared and they have no idea, guess what? Who's in control of the negotiations? You are in control of the negotiations. Right? So getting them to do that and focusing on interest, generating options for mutual gain, this is all standard negotiation stuff, but still something which is good to inculcate. And in addition, students are trained to do stuff like gauge the culture of your committee. What kind of committee is this, right? Take advantage of that. Use rules of procedure to control the flow of negotiations. Right? Value and use crucial advantage provided by being properly dressed, right? Comporting yourself in a proper manner, which demands respect and attention. Right? Be aware of maneuvers and tricks which are used to take you away from what you want to achieve. So I'll just give you an example of, I'm actually quite proud of this thing. My college level team runs a high school model UN. They do this completely on their own, from scratch. Everything, from setting the agenda, from recruiting schools to come, from managing everything, like any UN conference. It is now the largest model UN conference in the Southeast. We had just over 900 student participants. We just ended last month. And they do this on their own based on what they have learned in the college courses. Right? And they do a great job, even if I'm the one who is saying it. Right? So again, there are so many different skills at so many different levels that this experience can bring to people if we do it, and we do it properly. And of course, there are lots of other options. Just to give you an example, there's also something called multilateral, which actually I run that program too, where they do the same thing for Arab League countries, which is a much smaller conference because there are only 22 members of the Arab League. There's a model European Union, which, by the way, European Union will give you money to host if you're interested in that, right? I think there should be a model SARC, right? No, as far as I know, nobody has it. Right?
India is actively sabotaging SARC, so. Well,
maybe we need to know how we can get the others to do things which will stop us from sabotaging SARC, right? So there's so many other possible variations here, and I really hope that my understanding is that there is interest in this on campus, and I would really encourage everybody to take this up and establish a program. I can assure you that with all the values and standards and goals that SNU has, this is an ideal fit for what you all want to do with your students, both undergrad and grad students. By the way, the German Foreign Ministry sends its trainees to our Model UN conference in New York. Because it is really the closest simulation you come to of how the UN actually works. So that's all I had to say. I tend to talk too much, so I deliberately decided not to talk too much. I'm open to any questions people might have, and I'll be happy to answer them, or try to answer them at least.
My name is Nimish Batra. I'm doing international relations course here. And so what I've seen, especially in the Delhi NMUN circuit, is that children from by the 9th grade or the 8th grade have started to do NMUN. And one thing that I've noticed is that the executive board members and the circuit in general place a lot of emphasis on international law more than the negotiations aspect of it and stuff pertaining to it. Now, do you see that as a problem, because you see every single person carrying a manual law, public, international law guide with them?
You know, the beauty of this program is that you can have different emphasis on it, right? So in some years, the NMUN might have as its focus international law, right? So then the topics, the committees, everything will be related to international law matters, right? Though the international law is a little too narrow in my view, but international law is certainly part of international relations and international negotiations and things like that. So I don't see it as a problem, but if that remains the only focus, I think that makes it a little too narrow, right?
The problem that a lot of executive board members face is that these solutions that people generally tend to send in are either repetitive or really unrealistic.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that becomes the only basis for them to judge or adjudicate, essentially, because understanding of international law is pretty complicated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, understanding Latin maxims and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that becomes the only way to assess whether a delegate is good or not. So how do we as delegates encourage solution-oriented approach to model UNs at the same point of time not being repetitive or being unrealistic in our opinion?
So there's always going to be some repetition, right? That is unavoidable. But as far as coming up with unrealistic solutions is concerned, you learn very quickly at a good conference what is unrealistic, and that if you want to achieve what you want to achieve, how do you make it realistic, right? So, and that is a part of the learning process, right? This is what happens in real life too. Right? You go in with an idea, and others say, you know, you are living in another world. This is not going to work here, right? And then you have to come up with some mechanism by which that idea can still be implemented, even though not the way you had originally wanted it to be implemented, right? So that is in my view, a part of the learning process. And there'll be delegations who'll come in who'll be totally unrealistic, right? And you're just pointing that out. There's another problem, right? One of the things that teams are judged on is staying in character, right? If you're China, are you behaving like China? Or are you behaving like an American undergraduate, with your ideas, right? So the idea is that you are stepping into someone else's shoes and you have to remain in those shoes. That is part of your learning experience. Or if you are India, are you, which you guys are never going to be because you never get your own country. But if you are India, are you going to, when the pressure mounts, because as you saw, this can get pretty intense, right? Are you going to stop being India and start behaving like an American undergraduate, right? So there was once a conference I was at where the delegation from Saudi Arabia proposed that all countries adopt the American curriculum for their schools. Right. Exactly, right? Delegation from Saudi Arabia, right? I mean, of course, they were the laughing stock of the conference, but this is what happens when you're under pressure. This girl, it was a young girl, she started thinking like an American kid instead of somebody from Saudi Arabia, right? So I think that having unrealistic solutions is part of the learning process. If your committee is dealing with implementation of SDGs, for example, right, and you come up with an idea which is not implementable, you'll find out very quickly. Others will say, how are you going to implement it? Where's the funding going to come from? When you're writing resolutions, for example, this is what they are doing. They're saying, okay, do you have an idea? Have you thought it out clearly? Right? Where's the funding going to come from? Right? You have to think of all of those things when you're drafting a resolution. Otherwise, your chairs will not even accept the resolution for debate. Right? They'll say, sorry, you need a funding clause here, right? Or you need to develop the reporting mechanism here. How are you going to follow up on this goal that you are planning to achieve through this resolution, et cetera, et cetera.
Great, thank you.
So my name is Prof. I'm a first year computer science student. My question is essentially, so we've been in the circuit for the past 2 to 3 years, and what we've seen, especially in the Delhi circuit, is the fact that NMUN has become more of an exclusive activity. It's for the people who can either not just afford, but either it has been secluded to students of law or students of IR per se, and students who can actually afford activities like that. So my question is, even if we were to associate ourselves with NMUN, how can we make it more inclusive, not just for people across Delhi, but inclusive for, let's say, the Seven Sisters in the North, because the conferences there are very less compared to what's in Delhi or compared to some other part of the country. How do we make them more inclusive for those people?
There are, how you're going to do that is a local issue which you guys have to settle locally, of course, right? NMUN, as a matter of policy, will provide you with support to do that, right? In the sense of giving you ideas of what to try, or talking about similar experiences, other situations where you can do that. As far as it becoming exclusive to just people from the social sciences and law, that I think is unfortunate, because some of my best delegates over the years have actually been people who are not from the social sciences, because they're thinking outside the box, right? They come in and they have this shining look in their eyes. They think they have an idea which will solve the world's problems, where more cynical international relations guys will say, oh yeah, sure, right? But the point is, no, seriously. So what happens is that I think that those people actually bring life to a conference. And by the way, they have technical information, which, as you saw, some of those committees are actually technical committees, right? So if you're talking about dealing with cyber crime, and you have nobody who knows anything about information technology, that's not going to be a very useful committee, right? If you have somebody who has some expertise in information technology, they will probably come up with ideas which are much more relevant to solving the problem of cyber crimes. So it's really, I think that when a new program starts, let's say you're starting a program here at SNU, that is the time to set the parameters, right? That is the time when you, in your first year, want to make sure that you're getting students who are not just IR majors, but are majors from different fields. Or business, for example, that's another big area from which we get some of our best delegates, right? Because they come with the $1 million question, so how are you going to fund this, right? Among other things, right? So it's, and my thing here is that really no matter what you end up doing, you're still learning, right? You are learning skills, you are getting experiences which you will find invaluable when you go out into the real world.
So does NMUN as an organization collaborate with local organizations across the world? Like let's say we are running an organization here which plans and organizing events like that, conferences like these. Does NMUN collaborate with them in terms of support?
If you are eventually going to come to NMUN in New York, yes. If you are going to host a conference here with NMUN, yes, right? But otherwise, it's a resource issue as always, right? There's always more demand than you have the resources.
So the local affiliates will have a representative body. Hypothetically, say it's SNU, and then we want to spread it to Hisar and Panipat and Kurukshetra and Chandigarh and lovely idea that you have. They would get support from us, and we in turn would then reach out to NMUN itself, make it easier like that. Because they don't have the bandwidth to handle 57 different requests.
Yeah. So just to give you an example here, you might want to hold a regional conference here, where you get these different schools to come and attend, and that in itself is a learning process for you and for everybody who comes here.
And we have a format. We have, in fact, Siddharth here from our eCell. What they've done is first they have a series of prep conferences where they prepare the students, kind of like your class facsimile, and then they let them compete.
Yeah. No, that's exactly what happens. There are two models for doing this. You can do this completely through a club, right, which has a lot of problems because, as I always say, when crunch time comes and you are taking your exams, you will obviously pay more attention to courses you're getting a credit for rather than some extracurricular activity, right? And then there are lots of universities in the States now who increasingly, every year the number goes up, actually offer this as a course, which is much more rigorous, of course. They have a curriculum which kind of goes through all those skills that you're supposed to be developing and preparing you and stuff like that. And then you go to those conferences. Yes.
One last question.
Yeah.
So does the organization follow the UNA USA rules of procedure?
Yes.
Or
yes. Yeah. In fact, our rules of procedures are the closest to the actual UN rules. We don't even have moderated caucuses.
So it's a separate rule of procedure?
It's very similar. There are one or two differences just for practical purposes, but essentially it follows the UN rules.
I'm talking about UNA
yes,
USA.
UNA USA. Yeah.
So I had a question. He's in fact the head of our IRGS program.
Oh, okay.
Thanks a lot.
I think, it's an excellent laboratory to sort of think about a whole range of issues, but what I like most is the notion of cultivating empathy for another position. I think good social science involves putting yourself in the shoes of somebody else, and I think this is a very good exercise for that. I had a question relating to one of your slides in which I think you talked about diplomacy and the skills which you're passing on, and I think one slide mentioned arriving at objective solutions or something of that nature. If you can sort of elaborate on that.
Sure.
That's one dimension.
When you're talking about what constitutes success, right, you need to have objective standards, right, on how you're going to decide when an initiative is successful. Right? And there have to be, as we say, let's have standards based, let's have objective standards, not standards based on who can do what to whom. Right. So basically, the advantage of this is unrealistic in some ways, is that everybody has one vote. There's no Security Council, right? Everybody has one vote. So if you are Vanuatu, my favorite small country, or the United States, you both have one vote, right? And so a lot of the power dynamics doesn't play out the way it normally would, but at least it gives you an opportunity, even if you've been assigned Vanuatu, to be active in committee and have an impact on what the committee comes up with. Right? So the idea of objective standards is how do we figure out whether this is going to be successful or not? Right? Who's going to report back to this body what the result of this decision was? Right? And what constitutes success?
Another dimension I wanted to sort of also flag briefly was the fact that there is a lot of multilateralism is desirable. Many of us do think it's going to solve important problems. Most of the issues today can't be solved by nation states in silos. All of that is true, but we also live in a moment in which there is isolationism of states. The United States is a classic instance of growing isolationism and less of international internationalism. So you convey some of these sort of tensions as well in the sort of
At this year's conference, the delegation that was the hardest to be was the United States. I don't have to elaborate on this. You can understand why, right? So, no, seriously, right? You're coming in there. Your country has been instrumental in building the international system as it is, right? And now you want to tear up all the rules, right? Your credibility is at zero, especially if your president has just spoken. So, but the one reason why when I joined the board, we decided we should have more international conferences is that we think that multilateralism is under attack, not only by the United States, but by the British, by the even smaller countries like Hungary or Poland, or Brazil is the latest example of that. So, and I think that this is making the world a much more dangerous place than it needs to be. It's bad enough as it is without this problem. And I think countries who are committed to multilateralism need to really step up to the plate right now, since the countries which have been pushing multilateralism for so long have decided to, walk away from it.
So I'm just thinking about gridlock around a whole range of issues today, or climate change issues, or any of these sort of large collective action, global governance questions. To what extent does that dimension?
That actually happens. Sometimes the committee needs to get lost, and they will adjourn debate on a topic and move on to the next topic simply because, and that is itself a learning experience, right? So how come we got deadlocked on this issue? This is so important. So there are processes for getting around deadlocks, but surprisingly, most of the people who come there are young people who are optimistic about the future. They tend to look at things with a clearer eye than old jaundiced people like me who are very cynical of the world and stuff like that. So you'll see people come up with, they really want to find solutions which they think it will work. And so yeah, we have deadlock, but not as often as one would think that would be the case, especially because everybody only has one vote. So that actually helps that process. So, yes.
Because when I was part of the NMUN, there was a common issue that we all delegates faced. The reason was that the agenda that was given was more down to earth, was more realistic with the whatever the government and the international scenario is facing. But at the end of it, when we were meeting for refreshments and we were just talking, we realized that as kids, if we can find a solution to this, and most of us did, there was not an objective standard, but well, we expanded the party, we tried to get everybody on board. And the question that arose is that if we can come up with a solution, we're kids. Why can't the elected leaders come? So, how are the agendas actually chosen and taken up, and why, now that UN is actually facing a major crisis, there's issue with its leadership, there's issue with the top 5 funding, so why aren't those topics actually taken up?
Okay, the way this works is that every year people apply to be on senior staff, i.e. Secretary General, Director General, etc. And this team actually puts together the agenda. And these are people who have done NMUN for at least 6, 7, 8 years. And then there's an advisory council of faculty members which goes through the agenda just to make sure that nothing is like completely off the wall. But essentially it's a conference which is organized by those people in terms of substance. Right? So that's how the agendas are set. And that is why also you might have noticed that agendas sometimes get repetitive, as they do in the real world too, right? We've been talking about this for 20 years. We have no solution. We are going to talk about it again, right? So that's part of the frustration. But to answer your question directly, the agenda is chosen by the senior staff who are appointed to do this. So the Director General and the Deputy Director General of the conference are the ones who are deciding the agenda topics, and the Secretary General in consultation with the Secretary General. Yeah.
So why don't we actually bring up topics such as this? So since the main motive of doing an NMUN is that students actually think from a different perspective. They think outside the box and they actually have an empathy towards other people as well. So why don't we bring up topics such as, say for example, US and China is currently facing a trade war. So US and China leave the top 5. So you actually get something that is not just a common problem, but something that can happen in the future, and see what the perspective of different countries, of different delegates actually come up with.
Well, there's nothing to prevent that from happening. And if one day you're on senior staff, you're welcome to make those topics the topic, right? There are some topics which are, for example, UN reform, which does come up. I think 2 years ago we actually had a simulation of the General Assembly fifth committee and the administrative committee, and a lot of UN problems which had to do with peacekeeping operations and the functioning of the UN, budgeting. Those issues were discussed. But most people find that to be terribly boring and non-productive. I'm not saying they are, but most younger people think that that really doesn't get us anywhere. But as I said, there's no policy which says these issues cannot be brought up. Right? And remember, this is a multilateral forum. So let's say we have the World Trade Organization, which is simulated sometimes, to have a topic which says the growing trade war between China and the United States. Some people would consider it to be too narrowly focused. Right? So they would say, why don't we have a topic which talks about trade barriers being put up by everybody? And in that context, talk about China and the United States, instead of just focusing on those two countries. Sometimes there will be very specific topics, like for example, last year or the year before last, one of the topics was the situation in Syria. So they were just talking about the Syrian civil war. So again, this is something that the people running the conference decide. The board normally stays away from it unless somebody is proposing something which is not acceptable for other reasons, nothing to do with substance. But that's how that works. Senior staff actually is quite international. So for example, our Secretary General for next year is from Germany. The Director General is French. The Deputy Director General is from the United States. I think we have an Indian guy somewhere on the senior staff. I'm forgetting what his position is. So it's these people who make that decision, right, about what topics will be brought up. So one day I hope to see you there, and you can decide what topic you want.
And if we get active, certainly we can have a more, maybe we take a technology-centric agenda. We look at the impact of artificial intelligence and machine learning on warfare. I mean, so we will have, people will have the option.
In fact, one of the topics I think for next year, is the impact, the ethical impact of use of artificial intelligence in business.
Yeah, no, it's a very tough one the world is going to face. When you let robots actually fire to kill, what happens? What happens? It's a complex Terminator-like scenario that can emerge. So,
anybody else?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I haven't really attended many NMUNs or anything, so my questions may seem facile. But okay, so I had several questions. So one, you described the incident of the girl recommending the American education system and then it was laughed at. However,
well, it was laughed at diplomatically. Nobody laughed at her face. Because, by the way, you are not allowed to correct somebody and say, hey, you are out of character. You're not allowed to do that.
However, is it not essential at an international setting to acknowledge the strengths of other education systems? Like, as a Cuban delegate, maybe my education system isn't great, maybe the Finnish education system is great, maybe I want to acknowledge that. Why?
Oh no, that's not a problem at all. Finland can get up and say, we're producing the best students in the world, and others should look at our program. No problem with that. But it's like, okay, I'll give you an example which would be at the same level of absurdity. If Pakistan got up and said, we should give up our claims on Kashmir, right? No Pakistani delegation is going to do that, right? So it's absurd in that sense, not in the sense that it's not possible. For a country like Saudi Arabia, which till very recently was super conservative, right, to say they want to adopt the American curriculum was kind of which planet are you living on kind of moment, right? If you are Saudi Arabia, which planet are you living on, right? So, but as I said, just because you say something which is totally out of character doesn't mean people will yell at you or because we are very strict about that. The idea is that we are encouraging people to participate as much as possible, and as I said, they were laughed at diplomatically. Nobody just laughed in their face at them.
Yeah, and also, in addition to that, I tend to believe, I could be wrong, that these kind of conferences focus a lot on executive decisions and what to do on the top. However, I mean, do you not think what is equally essential is how it gets implemented at a grassroots level?
Absolutely.
Because I was sitting at one of these conferences and it was not a NMUN, about climate change, and like you were sitting in air-conditioned rooms and drinking water out of plastic bottles. And I was really like, what's the point even of discussing climate change if this is the kind of setting you are discussing climate change in?
Yes, you're absolutely right. And that is the kind of contradictions that we actually live in the real world, right? There are, for example, this high-level forum on sustainable development. The reason I put it up was that when this, I think this was last year, maybe the year before last, they actually did what you were saying, right? They said, we are only interested in resolutions, right, which are looking at implementing these ideas at the grassroots level, right? We are not interested in some big policy decision which will apply to everybody or so on. And especially whenever issues with regard to the SDGs come up, this is always the issue, right? So how are we actually going to implement these? Everybody knows what the SDGs are and what the targets are and all that kind of stuff. Repeating that doesn't help, right? So how are we actually going to implement it? Do you have some new idea about how to implement it or whatever SDG you're talking about? So yeah, again, the conference is run to a large extent by the participants, right? If they decide to do it, they can do it. If you think that sitting in a conference dealing with environmental affairs, people shouldn't be using plastic glasses and drinking refrigerated bottles, refrigerated water and sitting in an air-conditioned room, you can bring that up. Nobody's going to say, please sit down, you're wasting our time kind of thing.
Also, lastly, this might sound like a bit of a misnomer, but isn't there some merit in stepping out of any identity at all, including a national identity, to make decisions? I mean, maybe like if I'm arguing from US, I might be like, okay, no, withdrawing back into ourselves is the right thing to do. What Trump's doing is right because I want to support him. However, do we not make the most rational decisions when not bound by these?
That is actually the best question of the day, right? Because the idea really is that we are using the nation-state system because that's the way the international community is currently organized. But the goal really is we can't do without it, right? Unfortunately, I think the nation-state system has outlived its utility, but that's a separate issue. The best alternative we have is multilateralism, right? And that's what we are trying to promote. You're right. If you could step out of all national identities and look at the world's problem, you would be a superior human being, right? And unfortunately, there's no mechanism for us to run a conference based on that, unless we have a conference of world youth, right, who are saying we don't care about what country we come from. We are looking at the globe as one unit, and we are coming up with problems for that. But that's not what this body does, right? In fact, if you want to organize something like that, I think that would be a great idea, right? Sure.
Great. Thank you so much. We have to respect the time. No, thank you. That was really, really illuminating and exciting. I think it set the foundation for us to take this forward. What I'd like to say by way of the ending, that for the moment, initially, I'm going to act as the sort of the initial anchor for this effort. We're obviously going to involve SHSS, in particular IRGS, as one of the key constituents. We'll also have faculty from other schools, including management, and I'm hoping that it'll soon have its own identity and own character and not be, it'll be sort of planned school. And that's our goal for SNU. One of the fantastic opportunities we have, if we take this seriously, is that we will host one of these regional conferences, right?
International conferences.
International conferences in 2023, where we would have delegates on campus from at least 40 countries. Right? That's the normal
40, 50 countries. For India, it might be actually more because one of the big drawbacks is cost of travel. So the cost of travel to India is much less than going to Japan.
Okay, so it's be a wonderful sunrise moment for SNU itself for what it will mean to our body. So I hope you're all excited. Well, please write to me if you're specifically interested and involved in the initial chapter, because we will get it going. We will be seeking faculty advisors. I have a couple of default options whom I'd like to see take on the role of the faculty advisor, so we can get that going, and then we'll share ideas of how to take this forward. Professor Naim is going to be a great help to us. He's shared course outlines, he's got clear procedures in mind. There's a number of things that he can help us through doing this. His suggestion is that we quickly get going on this effort, do sort of intra-campus conferences or a competition to start, and then we host conferences for other institutions as a way of preparing for our teams for the global entry. And just as we do for the AIC and for entrepreneurship in general, we'll follow something similar. Final thing that I want to add to this, some of you may be aware that I'm working with another UN committee on the Sustainable Development Goals. We have taken a leap in the dark primarily because of SNU, frankly, and my presence and insistence of inducting and inviting Noida and Greater Noida to be one of the cities part of this global initiative. So there will be actually a fair number of resources that will flow in to Noida and Greater Noida, which we will at SNU be able to take advantage of. So that's another good boost for us to get engaged with this activity. So with that, thank you again, Rashid, and thank you all for coming by. And again, please write to me if you are interested so we can move this forward.